Hello, music fans. I saw over at the Sea of Tranquility channel, Pete Pardo's been recording videos about the best six album runs in music history, classic six album runs. And that got me thinking, I think there's some bands that have even longer runs than that. So I put together a list of eight bands with 10 flawless albums in a row, and eight more who only got to nine flawless albums in a row, but that both are still really impressive. In order to make this list, though, I had to kind of remove the sales portion of the requirements because a lot of these bands they don't sell well, but they make really quality music. So this is less of an objective list and more subjective. It's just my opinion, but these are bands that I think made 10 flawless albums in a row, and it's very hard to do that. A lot of classic bands that you expect to see on lists like this probably won't be on my list. Like, I don't know, some spoilers here. I guess bands like Metallica, Megadeth, Iron Maiden, those aren't going to be on my list because I don't think they've ever released 10 in a row that are flawless. They always have a dud in there somewhere. Even a band like Genesis, there's duds in their catalog. So this list will focus mostly on metal, rock, and progressive music, as those are the genres that I focus on. And without further ado, let's jump into the first band with 10 flawless albums in a row on my list. And that is Between the Buried and Me. And this is their entire discography. They only have 10 albums, but I think everything they put out has been really great, starting with their self-titled in 2002. It's a little more metalcore, a little less progressive, moving into Silent Circus. Still metalcore and not as progressive. They start getting more progressive around Alaska, and they really hit their peak for me at Colors, which I think is my favorite album of theirs, and when they really became the band that they are today. And then just everything since has been amazing, all the way up to their most recent release, Colors 2. And the second band on my list here is Dream Theater. And you could argue that maybe their whole discography is flawless. If so, that's a 15 album run, which is really impressive. I think it's all good. I don't think they really have a bad album. So I'd be okay with somebody saying that. But this is my favorite 10 album run they did. And it's the one from Images and Words in 1992, which is their second album, up to a dramatic turn of events in 2011, which is their first album that featured Mike Mangini on drums. Yeah, I think their weakest album is their debut, When Dream and Day Unite. So that's the only one that I'd be hesitant to qualify as flawless in their discography. On here, probably the most questionable one for me is maybe Falling into Infinity. I feel like there's some songs on here that are a little weaker, but it's still a pretty solid listen. So I consider it, I qualify it for part of this flawless 10 album run. Third band on my list here is Opeth. And they might even have an 11 album flawless run if you include My Arms, Your Hearse. But I started this run at Still Life and went to their most recent Coda Venom from 2019. And I think they're all great. They're progressive death metal from between Still Life and Watershed. And then from Heritage to Coda Venom, they abandoned the death metal altogether and they're just progressive rock. No growls anymore, more classic 70s sound. And yeah, I don't really, I'm pulling up Wikipedia page because Wikipedia has a good view of discographies. I like using Wikipedia to look at artist discographies. It's probably one of the best sources. Yeah, Orchid and Morning Rise, they're good, but to me, they're not something that I return to. The production's a little weaker. It has a little bit more of a black metal sound that I don't really like. I think the composition too just isn't as cohesive, and songs on these seem like just a string of random riffs strung together and just alternating between brutal black metal shrieks and then acoustic guitar parts. Their riffs are really cool. That the compositions just don't flow for me, so that's why I don't think these two are flawless. But the rest of Opeth's discography is really great. Here's another one. This is a tricky one. Devin Townsend is the fourth one who I'm going to say has 10 flawless albums in a row. For this string of 10 albums, I'm counting Z2, the double album, as 2 albums. If you think that's cheating, okay, you can group them together as one, but then put on the Casualties of Cool album that also came out in 2014, which features Devin Townsend. It's not under the Devin Townsend name, it's under Casualties of Cool, but he's still been on 10 flawless albums in a row, either way you look at it. Starting from Ziltoid the Omniscient in 2007 up to Empath in 2019. This is an interesting one because the bookends of this are, well, especially at the front, I really do not like those albums. I'll show you, looking at his discography. Yeah, right before this string of great albums that started in 2007, he released The Hummer and DevLab, his ambient albums, and I really don't like these at all. I guess I'm just not into ambient noise music. It's just unlistenable to me. And then he also ends this string of 10 albums after Empath with the Puzzles and Snuggles, which are also more ambient. However, these are a bit more listenable. They're a bit more musical than DevLab and the Hummer, but they're not as strong as Ziltoid, Z2, Empath, or anything he released under the Devin Townsend project name, Key up to Transcendence, or Casualties of Cool. Like I find those all really strong. And really, he only releases duds when he dips into this ambient sound. Pretty much all the rest of his stuff is pretty good. Not huge on this. The first one, Punky Brewster's a little weaker too, and it's more of a joke, like comedy rock album. It's kind of fun, but I wouldn't say it's flawless. But the rest of his discography is really, really solid. Recommend everybody check him out because he's quite a versatile artist. Now, who do I have next? I've got Yes. And I went with their string of albums starting from Time and a Word in 1970, which I think is their second album, up to 90215 from 1983. The questionable one on here is Tormato. Some people might say Tormato is not flawless. I actually think it's underrated. I feel like it's pretty good. It's definitely I think it's the weakest one in here, that and Time in a Word, but I think they're both still really good listens that I enjoy them quite a lot. And they have other good runs of albums in their discography too. They've released a lot of albums. Their first album, I think they're still kind of finding their sound. Even Time in a Word, they're finding their sound a little bit. They haven't quite found the magic yet. But they play with an orchestra and they have some cool songs. I think it's the Yes album where they become truly amazing and legendary. And then, Fragile is my favorite album by them. Close to the Edge, probably my second favorite by them. Tales from Topographic Ocean's really great. Like, yeah, they kind of released like their top 4 albums right in a row. I think this is like the best period. Relayers, probably maybe their top 5, 6 albums in a row even. These albums are great. Tormato's a bit of a dip, but still pretty awesome. Drama is really great. 90215 is a complete change of direction. It's not really even prog rock anymore. It's more pop rock, but I think it's really well done. Songs like Owner of a Lonely Heart, really catchy. Hold On, It Can Happen, Change It. Just every song on here is just amazing. It's super 80s and cheesy, but it's pretty awesome. So yeah, kudos to Yes for this amazing 10 album run. Next, I've got King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. And this is a band that releases a lot of music. You could even say that they have 17 flawless albums. I think everything from Paper Mache Dream Balloon in 2015 to Changes in 2022 is pretty flawless. But this is my favorite 10 album run here. their 5 albums from 2017 up until Butterfly 3000 in 2021, which is my favorite album from them. So if anybody watching this has other suggestions of bands they think have 10 flawless albums in a row that they released, pop it down in the comments, because I'm curious to hear if there are others that I have missed in the metal, rock, and prog worlds. Pretty well versed, but obviously haven't heard everything. But yeah, King Gizzard, they're an interesting band. They release a lot of different types of music. Like Sketches of Brunswick Geese is kind of jazzy, and Infest the Rat's Nest is a thrash metal album. Most of the other albums on here are psychedelic rock. 3 of these, they experiment with microtonal music, Flying Microtonal Banana and KG and LW, where they use microtonal guitars, which those are the notes in between our standard Western music notation notes. So that's pretty cool. And then Butterfly 3000 is like a dream pop album. So really interesting variety in here. And let's pop over to their Wikipedia discography. So they have a lot here. Yeah, I think Quarters I wouldn't qualify as flawless. It's a little, it's still good, but not as amazing for me. But I think from Paper Mache Dream Balloon all the way to Butterfly 3000, or maybe even, yeah, all the way to Changes, is just such a great run of albums, and that's 17 albums. So honestly, that's probably the longest run of amazing albums I've seen from any band. Let me know if there's some other band that has a longer, more amazing run than that. And they did it over such a short period of time, 2015 to 2022, just amazing. Second last one on my list here of bands that have 10 flawless albums in a row is Ayreon. It's their whole discography here. They've released 10 albums, and I think they're all just really good. They're progressive metal rock operas, so you have to be into for that kind of thing. But they bring in a lot of amazing guest vocalists. So this project's run by Arjen Lucassen, and I think he's going to have an album coming out this year with a new project. It's not with Ayreon and it's not with Star One. I think it's like Arjen's Supersonic Revolution. I don't remember the name of it, but I'm looking forward to hearing that. It sounds cool. I think it's going to be very 70s inspired. That's what he's saying. Yeah, Arion is more like almost like musical theater in the style of progressive metal and progressive rock with different singers, and he brings in singers like James LaBrie from Dream Theater, Michael Ackerfeld from Opeth, 2 guys who have been on the list already. Oh, and Tommy Rogers from Between the Buried and Me. So a lot of the bands that I've talked about already, they've actually had their singers featured in Arion's albums. And yeah, it's just really cool. You have to be okay with a little bit of cheesiness and kind of liking musical theater and rock operas to like Arion. But if you're okay with that, Arion's probably the best person out there at doing these types of progressive metal rock operas. And last one on my list, the last band that I could think of that had 10 flawless albums in a row is Big Big Train. Maybe they even had 11. I think their last 11 up to and including Welcome to the Planet. But this is my favorite 10 album run here with for them, starting with The Difference Machine in 2007, going to Welcome to the Planet in 2022. Just all amazing albums. Yeah, almost their whole discography is amazing. For me, I feel like the dip here is Bard in 2002. That's the one that I don't think is flawless, but everything else here is pretty good. And they're kind of more like progressive rock, new prog. Some people say neo prog, a little bit of post rock in there. Yeah, really, really cool band. I'm looking forward to hearing what they do next. Unfortunately, they lost their singer. David Longdon passed away recently in 2021, so that's unfortunate. But it looks like they found a new singer, Alberto Bravin. So looking forward to hearing what they put out with him, but rest in peace, David Longdon. And now let's jump to some honorable mentions here. I got them all on one page. These are bands that have 9 flawless albums in a row, but didn't quite hit the 10 in a row mark for me. So I've got Rush, The Beatles, Foo Fighters, King Crimson, Gentle Giant, Every Time I Die, Deep Purple, and Primus. Rush, I think their first 9 albums from Rush to Signals in 1982. After that, they released Grace Under Pressure, which is still good, but just doesn't quite live up to what they did before, in my opinion. They kind of move in a different direction. They move away from prog. Let's jump over to the Rush discography page. Yeah, around here. Well, Signals, they kind of move away too. They bring in more synth, but it's still progressive rock. They definitely bring in some new wave and reggae influence here, but they even started that like before on Moving Pictures. It has some of that. Even Permanent Ways has some of that new wave influence coming in, but they really embrace it in Grace Under Pressure, and it's not as progressive anymore. And I still think there are some cool songs on here. It's just not flawless for me. And then same thing all through the 80s after that. Power Windows, Hold Your Fire, Presto, just weaker Rush albums in my opinion compared to this run right here. And same thing with their 90s stuff, Roll the Bones, Counterpress, Despereco. I just don't think it ever lives up to this 10 album run, even Vapor Trails. It starts to get good again for me with their last 2, Snakes and Arrows and Clockwork Angels. I think they go back to more of a progressive sound, but they also keep their like hard rock edge that they were doing in the 90s, which is cool. So good job, Rush, on this 9 album run that you did. If only Grace Under Pressure was flawless, you would have made the list. And then the Beatles, I think their last 9 albums from Help to Let It Be are the flawless ones. Let's look at their discography here on Wikipedia. Yeah, the weak one here is Beatles for Sale is what's holding it back from being a 10 album run. I think Hard Day's Night is really good, but I think Beatles for Sale and With the Beatles and Please Please Me just don't, they're more of like pop rock albums, and they aren't as they're more just like a collection of songs, and I think they have covers on them, which I don't really want to hear. I prefer hearing the Beatles' original songs. And then I really think with the Rubber Soul and Revolver, they start making and crafting albums and using the studio more as an instrument, and they become a really innovative band. So this period of albums from Help to Let It Be, I think, is just really strong. Obviously, they're the most famous rock band of all time, so a lot of people must agree with me on this. If you count Past Masters as an album, which I didn't because it's a compilation, then maybe they do have 10 flawless albums in a row, because Past Masters is a great album that has that compiles all of their songs that weren't featured on any of these other albums in their core catalog. So it's usually a bunch of non-album singles, and a lot of those are really, really great. So if you count that, then they qualify for my list of artists that have 10 album runs. And next I have Foo Fighters. I think their first 9 albums are great, from their self-titled to Concrete and Gold in 2017. Jumping back to their Wikipedia page here, the only other one that I don't think qualifies as flawless is Medicine at Midnight. I feel like that was a bit of a dip in quality. It's still good, but I feel like these 9 albums are great, and then they kind of let me down with the most recent one. Next up, I've got King Crimson, and here's another band that almost has a flawless discography, but there's one exception for me, and that album's Islands. So I think their 9 album run from Lark's Tongues in Aspects in 1973 and The Power to Believe in 2003 is great, flawless run. But for me, where they dipped was right before that with Islands in 1971. I think it's still good, but everything else they made is great. And this one, I just don't have as much fun listening to. I don't really want to go back to it. All the other ones I can listen to over and over again, and I find them all great. Their first three, In the Court of the Crimson King, is legendary, possibly the first progressive rock album ever made. A lot of people consider that to be the first. In the Wake of Poseidon is kind of like In the Court of the Crimson King version 2, the sequel. It's kind of a not as good as the first one, but pretty similar and pretty close, so I still like it. Lizard is cool, has a cool long epic. The title track that features John Anderson, really like that one. The Islands just doesn't really have anything going for it for me. I'm just not into it. But then everything they did after that, this is their great 9 album run here. Now let's talk about Gentle Giant. Their first 9 albums is a really great 9 album run. Then their last two, they kind of went out with a little bit of a 2 duds in a row, in my opinion. But Gentle Giant from 1970 and To the Missing Piece in 1977, great string of 9 albums. Let's look at what those all are on their Wikipedia page here. So yeah, they start with Gentle Giant, then Acquiring the Taste, Three Friends, which is great, Octopus, In a Glass House, The Power and the Glory. Freehand is my favorite by them, but I also really love Octopus and really love The Power and the Glory. Honestly, really just love all of these albums up to The Missing Piece, but then these two, Giant for a Day and Civilian, kind of disappoint me. They move away from the prog sound and they start going in more of a pop direction. I actually kind of started that on The Missing Piece, but I still think The Missing Piece has some great songs. I actually really like 2 Weeks in Spain. I think it's super catchy. But then when they go for Giant for a Day, there's no prog anymore here. I think Spooky Boogie is a fun instrumental, though. It's kind of fun, but And Words from the Wise is an okay song. In fact, it's still a pretty good pop rock album. It's just so disappointing after you get used to the quirky progressive rock sound that Gentle Giant has before that. And then Civilian, same thing, kind of just disappointing to me. Just a hard rock album from one of the most innovative experimental progressive rock bands that of multi-instrumentalists that are all virtuosic, and then they go and they make kind of straightforward poppy hard rock music for their last 2 albums. It's just unfortunate, but hey, it's better. I'm glad these exist still, and they let me hear what Gentle Giant would sound like if they're trying to be a radio rock band. They're kind of interesting from a historical perspective. But this is the string of 9 albums that I'll be going back to and listening a lot to. And I have a Gentle Giant album ranking video on my channel too, if you want to check that out, that I did with my friend Alon. 3 more bands to go on my honorable mentions list here. I got Every Time I Die. They have a 9-album discography, and they're all great, starting with Last Night in Town from 2001 to Radical in 2021. They're more of a metalcore band. Most of what I've been talking about is kind of prog metal, prog rock, or just like classic rock or alternative rock or psychedelic rock. But here's one that's more like extreme and metalcore. I guess Between the Buried and Me was kind of progressive metalcore, but they're not really as progressive, though they do have like time signature changes and some adventurous compositions. They're more metalcore with some hardcore punk and southern rock influences, and all their albums are great. Unfortunately, this band is called it quits, so this is going to be the only 9 albums they ever release, and they won't ever be able to make my 10 flawless albums in a row list. But what they put out is amazing, and I think they're possibly one of the best metalcore bands, if not the best, in terms of just being consistent and never releasing anything bad. Their first 2 albums, the production's a little weaker, but they up their game later, and then the riffs are still awesome, and just the energy and the brutality and how hardcore and intense everything is just really awesome. But then their production starts being amazing here too, and even their last 7 albums, they maintain the intensity, the hardcore, but they also have like catchiness and hooks and everything to them. So just a really great band. I recommend them if you haven't heard them. And then I've got Deep Purple. It's my second last honorable mention here, starting with Deep Purple in Rock in 1970 to The House of the Blue Light in 1987. I think that's a string of 9 great albums in a row right here. And their first 3, I don't think are perfect. It's before they got Ian Gillan as a singer. They're kind of haven't found their sound yet, I don't think. They're still good, but just not flawless for me. And then they become really good here. And then Slaves and Masters is a bit of a dud. I think it's got a different singer on it. Someone with Jolyn Turner, not Ian Gillan. There are some other albums in this run that don't have Ian Gillan on them, like Burn and Stormbringer. But I think they're still really good albums. Actually, Come Taste the Band doesn't have him either. Yeah, the David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes era, these 3 albums are pretty good too. So I like Ian Gillan vocal albums, and then these 3. Yeah, then Ian Gillan comes back on Perfect Strangers, which is great. And then House of the Blue Light's great. Slaves and Masters, he goes away again, and that's where it dips. But then actually everything after Slaves and Masters is pretty good. The Battle Rages On, Perpendicular, Abandoned Bananas. They have another like 8 album run here that I think is really solid. Turning to Crime is just a covers album. I kind of wish they didn't spend their time on that. That they just released a studio album. It's kind of more of a waste of time in my opinion, but it's still decent to hear them do the covers. It just, I want to hear their original stuff. And then the last artist on my list of honorable mentions here, Primus. Their whole discography of 9 albums is really solid. Oh, one thing I should say about Deep Purple before I move on, if you count their Concerto, which is a live album, then they do have a 10 album run that's flawless. The reason why I think you might want to count it is because it is original music that's not featured on any of their other albums. It's a concerto for group and orchestra. It's very innovative. It's among the first combinations of rock music with a full orchestra. So it's composed by John Lord, and he got a whole orchestra in, and they recorded it live, which is why it's more of a live album and not a studio album. But since it is original music composed by a member of Deep Purple that's not found on any other album, I could almost argue that it counts as a studio album, and then they do have a 10 album run that's amazing. Anyway, that's more of an aside. Let's talk about Primus, the last one on my list. So they've got 9 albums in a row that are great. Primus also started their career with a live album, I believe, called Suck on This, which is also pretty good. So if you count that live album, then I think they've got 10 in a row that are great. Just a very quirky, they're just a quirky, like funk metal, alternative metal. They got some progressive rock and experimental influences. Definitely not for everybody. The vocal style is of Les Claypool are very strange. It's almost more of a narrator than a singer on a lot of the songs, but it's just fun, quirky music. They're very unique sounding and immediately identifiable. And his bass playing is just amazing. He's perhaps my favorite bass player. Just really, really great music. And that's it for my 8 bands that have released 10 flawless albums in a row, and then 8 others that almost did and just released 9. Let me know if you can think of any other bands in metal rock and prog that have done this. Pop that down in the comments, and I'll check those bands out, because I'm sure there are some others that I've missed that have a really consistent long string of great albums, and I'd love to hear it. All right, until next time, peace out.